Today's episode is being sponsored by GCF Valuation. They were the first appraisal firm to deliver SBA-compliant valuations serving the SBA 7A lending market starting in 1997, while also serving the business broker community. GCF Valuation is known in the valuation industry for their deep expertise, high-touch personal service, and for their superior reputation for handling the most complex engagements. When you need a valuation done right the first time, no firm is more flexible and capable. You can find more information about GCF at gvalue.com. And if you would like to hear more about how GCF approaches valuations, you can listen to episodes 36 and 39, where I interview the two founding principals of GCF, Darren Mize and Steve Mize. Hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Domenic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
A significant issue facing many business owners is the impact of underfunded multi-employer pension plans. This is most common, but not exclusive to unionized businesses. As we all know, many of these multi-employer pension plans might be struggling to maintain sufficient liquidity to address the future needs of the pension participants. This issue can quickly dominate and or foil a proposed merger or acquisition if there is an outstanding pension liability. Our firm has been involved in a good number of M&A transactions where an unfunded pension liability becomes a significant barrier to an owner being able to walk away from their business. Today, we are being joined by Todd Solomon, who is a partner at McDermott Will Emery and serves as global head of the firm's employee benefits and executive compensation practice group. For more than 20 years, Todd has helped organizations maximize the value of and return on their investments in human capital while avoiding exposure to liability. Todd is a fellow of the American College of Employee Benefits Council, which recognizes attorneys who have made significant contributions to the advancement of the employee benefits field for at least 20 years. Todd, welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast, and look forward to discussing the proactive steps owners can take to get ahead of this potential issue, which is not insignificant if they're in a multi-employer pension plan that's underfunded.
No, absolutely. And thank you, Domenic, for having me on.
So, Todd, if we could, I gave some highlights on you, but can you give us a little bit more about your firm and yourself, and then we'll dive into this issue a bit.
Sure. So I've been with McDermott Will Emery my entire legal career, so a little over 22 years now, straight out of law school. In fact, was an intern at the firm while I was still in law school. McDermott is a global... By the way,
I don't hear that very often. That's amazing.
That's true. It's becoming an increasingly dinosaur thing to do, but I'm very proud to have set up shop there in one place and have moved through the ranks. But you're exactly right. There's a lot of mobility amongst lawyers, although McDermott does a nice job of retaining a lot of people for a long time. So it's been a great place to work. But yeah, the global law firm, we're over 1,000 lawyers worldwide, about 20 offices, throughout the globe, U.S., Europe, and spread throughout the U.S. I'm in the Chicago office, which was our founding office. We've got a couple hundred lawyers in Chicago, and I'm, as you mentioned, the chair of the Employee Benefits and Executive Compensation Practice Group, which is about a 30-person practice group spread throughout the U.S. through Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, Boston, and Dallas.
That's great. Wow. You guys have tremendous experience, I know, in this area. And I'm so interested in diving into this because it's coming up more and more as, boomers are getting ready to retire and they're part of these multi-employer pension plans. And so I'm going to dive right in, if you don't mind. I mean, as it relates to M&A, this issue becomes potentially a significant time bomb. And so why don't we start with, at the highest level, an explanation for the M&A Unplugged community about, this whole multi-employer pension universe, and then, the specific issues that you start to see when these pensions are, underfunded or maybe trending in that direction.
Yeah, and I'll start at somewhat of a basic level and kind of grow into it because, we want to make sure all listeners, even if this isn't something they've been exposed to, kind of get what we're talking about. So there's really two types of retirement plans in the world. There's defined contribution plans, like savings plans, what people know as 401k plans, and defined benefit pension plans. And the savings plans are not what we're talking about today because savings plans are fully funded. They go up and down with the market. They might grow, they might decrease if the market's bad, but they're fully funded. Every dollar in that account belongs to a participant. Defined benefit pension plans are different because they provide a defined benefit, as it says, at retirement. So there's a mathematical formula that essentially promises a benefit to an employee at retirement, which might be age 65, might be earlier, depending on the terms of the plan. But because it sets a promised benefit and isn't fully funded on day one, there's an opportunity for that benefit to be well funded by the employer along the way, meaning the employer puts in enough money, and in some cases, perhaps too much money to fund the benefits. Or more commonly, the employer tries to fund it along the way, but because of actuarial assumptions and variability of investment market performance, particularly in a down market, it may be that the company is not putting enough into the plan to fund the future benefits, which creates the exact situation you're talking about, where you have what's called an underfunded pension plan, which means on an actuarial basis, the liabilities exceed the assets. So unlike another retirement plan where you might purchase it in M&A and there's some administrative costs and some integration to think about, a pension plan can really throw a wrinkle into M&A because it's significantly more complicated for a buyer to deal with and significantly, might weigh down a seller depending how underfunded it is. And a complication that arises that compounds the underfunded pension plan problem is the multi-employer pension problem. So a multi-employer plan is a special kind of pension maintained by the union for unionized employees that an employer contributes to, not just for its own employees, but for also the employees of other employers. So basically you get a pool of companies contributing on behalf of people that are in the same collective bargaining union. And what the complication is there is, in addition to the normal underfunded pension problem that you might have under any pension plan, a multi-employer plan contains a compounded significant extra problem, which is if you ever want to leave one of those plans, either bargain out of it or terminate it or somehow be done with it, you have to pay what's called withdrawal liability, which is essentially an undivided portion of the underfunding of the entire plan. So basically, the way to think about it is a private pension plan, you're stuck with your own stuff, and that could be significant if you're underfunded on your own stuff. And on a multi-employer plan, you're stuck with not only your own stuff, but an undivided portion of everybody else's stuff. So if everybody else is not contributing enough and the fund isn't doing a good job of investing or getting assets, you could, on the way out of one of these things, be forced to contribute on behalf of the other employers in your fund.
Yeah, wow. So there's so much there to unpack, Todd, because, as you point out, it's bad enough if you've got your own plan and you're not doing the job, but now you're tied to every other employer in that plan, and it's out of your control.
That's right. It really is. And even the investments under such plan are in large part out of your control because you are a contributing employer. You, the company, are a contributing employer to the multi-employer plan, but the plan is really sponsored by the union, invested by the fiduciaries of the plan that aren't necessarily appointed by you. So when you're in one of these plans and you bargain into one of these plans, you really are, in some sense, the positive part about it is you don't have to maintain it, you don't have to administer it, you just have to contribute to it. The negative is it really is outside of your control, and if there's bad investments or underfunding over time that gets compounded year over year over year, you, the company, are significantly disadvantaged, because if you ever want to get out of one of these things, it's not just about paying your own fair share. You might have to contribute on behalf of the remaining underfunding. So the underfunded pension problem, I've seen it, really disrupt M&A many, many times over the years. But in the multi-employer plan context, it gets even more complicated.
Yeah. So just to put some context, is there any accounting of how many multi-employer plans there are in the U.S. and how many of those might be underfunded?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the statistics with me on hand. These are public, funds. There are certain public disclosures, so you can pretty readily learn information on the funded status of the plan. And in fact, if you know the, fund that you're in or that you're considering or your employees might consider, so, for example, the Central States Pension Fund, you can Google, Central States Pension Fund. You'll pull up a page for that plan and find financial information about, how many assets the plan has, what are the present value of the liabilities, what the funded status is. And the government, which in the pension world is the PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, it has rules that require pension plans to essentially calculate their annual funding percentage, provide disclosures about that. And in the union context, so solely in the multi-employer plan context, there's fairly rudimentary color scheme that kind of makes sense. Or when I say it out loud, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about: red, yellow, green status. So union plans are rated as being green, which means they're well funded; yellow, which is kind of more at risk; and then red is more critical. So there is published information. I don't have the numbers off the top on how many funds there are across the country, but there are very many, and obviously local union numbers in each region. But there's a number of funds, and they're still rather popular because it's such a valuable benefit for a unionized workforce to bargain for.
Could you venture a guess at what percentage might be underfunded? Like, do you think it could be 50%, 70%, 20%?
Yeah, I think it would be a high number. And keep in mind, underfunded, most pension plans in the country are underfunded in some sense. So even plans that are, quote unquote, green might be 85% funded. That pension liabilities are very hard to manage, particularly in a down economy like we're in now. So even the well-funded pension plans, might be in the low to mid 80s, or boy, if they get into the 90s. And it's very rare, except in oftentimes you'll see a really, really well-funded plan in a small professional services context, like a doctor's group, or law firm pension plan might be 100% funded. But the vast majority of plans are underfunded, both private and multi-employer. I think the where the rubber meets the road is, in terms of withdrawal liability and what the exposure is out there is, are we talking about yellow or red on some of the tougher ones, and how chronically underfunded? And some of them are really, 55, 60, very poorly funded and frankly in financial distress, which is where that government agency, the PBGC, would come in, because it guarantees up to a certain limits. It guarantees pension liabilities in the event the plan can't meet those.
Got it. And to make sure I understand this, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Group, they provide uniform standards. So every multi-employer pension group is reporting the same way with the same metrics. So you can't have one group reporting one way, another group reporting another way. They have uniform standards, so you can compare really apples to apples. Did I get that right?
That's basically right. There's certain, actuarial assumptions that have some variability, but in general, that's right. That the PBGC has rules on minimum funding and how much you have to contribute to a plan, and how you value, what interest rate assumptions you use, and what amortization period you use to measure liability. So in general, that's right. You can get an apples to apples comparison, that if we had two plans of exactly the same size, and one was 86% funded and one was 82% funded, you'd feel better about the 86. I think the variability occurs where two plans can both be 84% funded, but one's really big, has a lot of employers contributing, good, a lot of money, left out there on the table. And then the other one is, really tiny, only has 3 employers left because there's been a race to get out of it. And the 2 other employers, left might be, groups that could withdraw. And then you as the last large employer might be at risk in an additional way. In other words, it can become a bit of a race to the bottom where when these funds have withdrawals and when companies can actually come up with the money to pay out a settlement and completely withdraw from the funds and bargain out of the plan, for example, you don't want to be the last employer standing holding the bag, because you, as the last employer, you're the one kind of turning off the lights and paying in the remaining underfunding. So the answer is yes, it is apples to apples, but 2 plans at the same funded percentage may not be created equal if they're of different sizes and different demographics.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So as an owner of a business in one of these multi-employer plans, am I entitled to receive from that pension plan my withdrawal liability on an annual basis? Can I get that number from the plan?
Yes, you usually can get that number, and if you contact the fund, and I believe it is a periodic thing. I don't think you're entitled to get it every month, but yeah, if you want once a year to get a request for partial or complete withdrawal liability, funds will provide that, and there can be some debate over those numbers. So that is something to sort of think about, that even for companies, folks listening who maybe know what that number is. I guess what I would say is, based on experience, that number, may not be the end of the discussion. There may be actuarial assumptions that went into that number that can be challenged or pressed upon. There oftentimes can also be a negotiation, because withdrawal liability is generally paid over a 20-year period of time, but many employers that want to get out of a fund might be willing to pay a lump sum upfront to bargain out of a plan and be done. So there's oftentimes frankly, a somewhat behind the scenes negotiation between the fund and its actuaries and the plan and its, lawyers and actuaries to try to negotiate, what you would call a settlement of withdrawal liability. So definitely the answer to your question is yes, you can get that number over time, but, thinking about working with advisors on what does this number mean and are we stuck with this number? Is there something else we can do is probably the best advice.
All right, so I want to dive into that a little bit, but before I do that, I'm going to ask an accounting question, and if it's unfair, just let me know, and we'll go forward. But most of the time, when I see clients that have a pension withdrawal liability, one, they didn't know what it was, they had no idea the level at which it was at, and they weren't carrying this liability on their books.
Yeah,
because they didn't even know they had it or the extent they had it. They thought the fund was fine and there'd be no issue. Then they go to talk to somebody and all of a sudden they realize they might have $1 million withdrawal liability. Is your recommendation, again, I know this is an accounting question, but is your recommendation that people carry that liability on their books, or not necessary until they actually get to the point where they're going to consider a withdrawal?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a bit unfair in that my last accounting was at the University of Michigan in 1990 something. But no, I think that's an interesting question, because I think you raise a really good point that most companies consider their ongoing contribution liability, and that's what's reflected on their books, because they intend that there's no current intent to withdraw or something like that. But it would be I think a very wise thing to think about doing if it doesn't destroy the financials. I mean, maybe that's why it's not done more often, because it can be a very large liability to withdraw from a plan. But normally companies think about it exactly the same way you're saying. They think about it as, I have an ongoing contribution liability and annual funding, minimum funding required contributions to this plan. And they don't really think about what's beyond that. And then they request a withdrawal liability figure because somebody, in the company or M&A advisor or somebody says, hey, what are we dealing with here? And then, they're shocked to see that there's this pretty sizable liability that, because the plan's underfunded, it's not just about contributing your annual contributions. Now you're withdrawing and you essentially have to make up part of that shortfall in proportion to your participation in the plan on behalf of everybody else who's left in.
That's exactly right. And you're leading me down the path to the follow question of that, which is in most M&A transactions, the buyers that we come across, unless they also happen to be a union shop with a multi-employer plan and they're used to it and they're accustomed to it and they're prepared for it, most buyers want that liability gone.
Yep.
In fact, most buyers want at the closing table for the business to withdraw from the union pension. I think by law, they have to replace it with a 401k plan or a like plan, and then have the owner of the business, the seller, settle up that liability so they don't keep on racking up future liabilities. Correct? Is all of that accurate?
Yeah, I think it is accurate. The challenge is that everything with the union has to be bargained. So your point about, it's not technically a legal requirement that it has to be replaced by a 401k. It's more of a practical requirement. Okay, you're taking away our pension. You can't do that without bargaining with the union to do that. And if you're bargaining with the union to take away the pension and replace it with something else, the something else usually not only has to be a defined contribution 401k plan, but oftentimes has to be a sweetened defined contribution 401k plan to essentially make people whole for what they're losing under the pension. And that becomes, very frankly, a very detailed negotiation. And what I think disrupts things like M&A, which move fast, is that's a process that moves slow. And it might take, if you're lucky, 4, 5, 6 collective bargaining sessions to negotiate and present something like that, and frankly to design it, because you might not already have the replacement defined contribution formula. You have to design it and then present it to the union and explain to the union why it's good for their members. So it is a, if M&A is allergic to pension in general, M&A is allergic to multi-employer pension if they don't already have the unions, like you mentioned, for that reason, because it's not even something, even if you wanted to, you might not be able to get rid of it in time for a transaction, because you got to bargain and you got to replace, versus a private pension, which has the underfunding problem, but you don't have to bargain for it. So if you want that terminated prior to closing, a buyer can demand a seller do that. And aside from the financial commitments and some of the administration of filing with the government and doing some of the things pension lawyers need to do that, it's pretty easy to close a pension plan as long as you had at least, call it 45 days notice.
Okay. So let's talk about that. I'm the owner of a business. I'm in a multi-employer pension plan, and I'm thinking that, I might want to sell my business in the next year to 3 years.
Yep.
What would your advice be to that owner as far as, getting the ball rolling? What should they do in advance? When should they come talk to you? And what can you do in advance of an actual transaction? So when they do decide to go to market, the M&A transaction can move quickly and not be held up by this process. Is that possible?
Yeah, it is possible. In fact, we're working with on a project like that just now. So it's a seller that essentially has a variety of union groups participating in multi-employer plans, and they come up over time, meaning the bargaining agreements, they don't all expire on the same date. That's just how the union agreements work. They each have an expiration date, and some are coming up very soon. I think 2 are expiring in the next 6 months. Or actually next 4 months, and then a couple over the next, 18 months, and then 1 or 2 more that are even longer term. But they are taking the opportunity, especially with the 2 coming up soon, to create a consolidated strategy to go to all their unions to bargain for a replacement. So it does really take a lot of lead time. So your 1 to 3 year example is sort of perfect. I think if an employer is in that situation and they know they want to market themselves for sale, but are concerned about the union pension liability, starting now to create a strategy to approach the union. If the bargaining agreement's coming up soon, then that's really easy. But even if it's not, I'm not the labor relations lawyer. We have other lawyers at my firm that do that, and I cooperate with. But they've told me that you can always approach midterm and start building a bridge to what's going to come up at the next expiration of the bargaining agreement, or even try to bargain for something in between, although that can be very challenging because if the union's got you under contract on something for X number of years, they're under no obligation to agree to anything else. But
Sure.
Basically making a consolidated strategy, I think if you had legal counsel, that would be smart. You'd probably also want a consultant, and there's consultants we work with in the pension space that help redesign formulas. The lawyers can do that as well, but oftentimes it does become a bit of an actuarial exercise to say, okay, we're replacing this formula. What would we replace it with? And who are the winners and who are the losers? Because inevitably, a replacement formula might be better for participants in certain situations, oftentimes younger participants who can grow their assets in the stock market over a long period of time. And oftentimes it's also worse for certain groups of participants, most typically the more senior ones who really get the benefit of the defined benefit pension.
And so, Todd, to be clear here, if an owner does have that sort of window, 1 to 3 years, or even 1 to 5 years, they can do the work, but not pull the trigger, because if there is a liability, most owners are going to want the proceeds from a sale to fund the liability to walk away. But you are suggesting they could do all this work, have it laid out, and then know what it's going to look like when they do go to market and
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And there's one step, the interim step that we haven't talked about, which would sort of cover this situation, is when you freeze a plan. So you can always bargain out of a plan and freeze the benefits, meaning you bargain, you negotiate for something else, you negotiate for a defined contribution replacement, and you stop the pension accruals in their tracks where they are. And that requires certain notices and certain steps. But basically, it freezes the liability. And if you're underfunded at that time, you have years to make up the liability, but you don't actually withdraw from the plan because you're still contributing on behalf of active participants who have frozen accrued benefits. So it's kind of a step between withdrawing, and carrying on.
Oh, so that's interesting. So you could actually freeze your liability as an interim step.
Yeah, if the union agrees to that, that's something that can be considered.
What's the likelihood of that? I mean, do you see that more often than not, or is it a tough battle?
It's a tough battle. It really depends on the negotiations and the status of what the union's getting as whether it's increased wages or replacement formula. But it definitely is an option.
Yeah. Boy, there's so much here to consider as a business owner if you're in one of these union plans about what to do. Has the current pandemic created potentially a sense of urgency for owners to get ahead of this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely yes is the answer. The thing that I think has surprised some people is how, the stock market initially took, kind of a giant hit, which absolutely has a, massive impact on pension funding. If you have underfunded plans and then the market drops, in a month or in a couple months, that has a huge impact on pension funding liability. The recovery that happened, in May, I guess, was more positive than I think certain people were expecting. But absolutely, I think the COVID situation has affected these discussions in a couple ways. One is the funding and the investment performance and the volatility of the markets, which really, makes pension, more undesirable. That it's a very desirable benefit to provide employees, but it's a very tough benefit to provide employees when you're not sure you're going to gain money in the stock market and be able to close that funding gap. And then the second thing is with the number of, layoffs and furloughs and movements in the workforce, that can really disrupt, withdrawal liability that, we've been talking mostly about complete withdrawal liability when you kind of try to get out of a fund entirely. But there's also something called partial withdrawal liability, that if you diminish your workforce and your contribution units, as it's called, by a set percentage, and you cross that percentage and you just don't have as much headcount because you've furloughed employees or can't use them and you're not contributing to the pension for them, you might trigger a partial withdrawal, which requires payment into the fund to partially make up your underfunding. So partial withdrawal is, I hadn't had a partial withdrawal question probably in years. And then since March 12th or whenever we went out of our office for COVID, I've had 3 or 4 of them.
Wow. Okay. So that comment brings up an interesting question. With workers getting furloughed, I also am thinking about unemployment rates are going up. I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I would assume that the number of union workers is probably on the decline as more people pull out of these funds. So does that natural trend really create double jeopardy for the people who remain in the funds potentially?
Yeah, it does, because it's kind of the last one holding the bag kind of problem, that as participation in the funds diminish, whether it's union groups dissolving or participation waning from terminated or furloughed workers, it does create higher anxiety for the ones left in there, because ultimately if there's a funding delta and as people withdraw, they're only making up part of that, or in some cases they even get favorable settlements when they negotiate out or have withdrawal because the funds need money. It can place a significant burden on the last few employers remaining in the plan. So yeah, in my experience counseling companies, they do get very anxious when multi-employer funds plans are dwindling and their membership is dropping, because they're afraid they're going to get stuck with the remaining liability.
Yeah, wow. I could easily see that picture playing out. I want to go back to this pension benefit guarantee organization.
Yes.
Is it what it means? I mean, are they a backstop to the underfunding potentially that's out there?
Yes.
Are they an insurance? So
Yes.
I hear that in Illinois alone, our shortfall in these pensions is just the shortfall is something like $270 billion. I don't know if that number is right or not. Maybe you know what that number is, but would they be a backstop to that $270 billion shortfall?
Yeah, so in general, the answer is yes, as to pension plans, but government pension plans are different. So government pension plans like the state, the states are backstop, for better or for worse. The PBGC governs plans that are governed by ERISA, which is the federal benefits law statute. So government plans are not typically covered by ERISA. So that example, I don't think the PBGC would step in there, but yes, PBGC is essentially an insurance agency, government agency. The plans pay in premiums. That's how the PBGC gets its money, was per participant premium or certain other types of calculation of variable premiums, where plans covered by the PBGC pay in. And then if the plan goes belly up and the sponsor of the plan can't fund it, the PBGC funds it up to guaranteed levels, which is not dollar for dollar for most, especially for higher paid or larger benefit participants. But the problem, or the thing that also gives a lot of people heartache, is the PBGC is not particularly well funded and is in significantly difficult financial condition. So it's basically like having homeowners insurance from a company insurance company that you're not sure if they're going to be around in 10, 20 years.
Bond status. That was going to be my next question, is PPGC in the green, the yellow, or the red? It sounds like they're teetering between yellow and red.
Yeah, I don't know the exact financial condition, but yeah, there's a lot written about the funding of the PBGC and whether there's sufficient backstop for all the underfunded pension plans, particularly the union plans. Those are kind of in the worst position.
So Todd, I feel like we're only scratching the surface here. Like, I feel like there's so much more we could dive into, but we're about at the end of the interview. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to sort of provide any high level, closing points that, advice that you would give to business owners who are in multi-employer pension plans, things that they should be thinking about and maybe considering doing, today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think the primary thing, and I know I've touched on this, is to really not be caught flat-footed, and you touched on it as well with some of your questions on, the withdrawal liability calculations you see when you see plan sponsors get that letter and they're shocked by it. So don't be flat-footed, requesting a withdrawal liability calculation from a fund, just to get your sense of what the liability might be out there does not, trigger a series of problems. It can create, some questions from the union and some things you might have to deal with, but it's not by itself a strange thing to do. So being proactive about what are my liabilities and how can I stay ahead of it instead of having a situation where I'm under the gun and I got to fix this, fairly giant problem in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. It'd be great to sort of think out over the years and work with advisors about how can we attack this problem, what can we do to address it in a way that is a win-win for both us and the union, because you're never going to get to yes on any of these negotiations without putting something in front of a union that satisfies it and its members, which can be done. I mean, I think there's a lot of attractive defined contribution replacement formulas out there that, if well thought out and well presented to the union, can get you to resolution. So that would be my primary advice: is don't wait for there to be a problem to kind of look at this and talk to advisors about it. Try to stay ahead of the curve and get as much information from the fund. So, like everything, information is power. Even if it's a bad withdrawal liability number and it's higher than you imagine, at least you know about it going in and you can do something about it.
Yeah, it's great advice. Todd, this has been tremendous. I really appreciate all the information. I know you live and breathe this stuff. You're an expert in this area. A lot of people are going to be a lot of business owners are going to be faced with this issue as they look to exit their businesses. If folks in the M&A Unplugged community wanted to get in touch with you, how could they best reach you?
Yeah, so the best way, I'm on our webpage, mwe.com, as in McDermottWillEmery.com. My email is probably the easiest place to reach me, T Solomon, TSOLOMON @MWE.com. Or anybody's welcome to phone me directly at 312-984-7513.
Todd, thanks again. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Appreciate the time.
So M&A Unplugged community, I just, to put a bow on this, because I think Todd really put it very well in his closing remarks. Our firm has been involved in a good number of transactions where our clients were part of a union pension plan. They were surprised by the liability number. They, in some cases, needed to get out. They were stuck. And if they had really researched this and done their homework and gotten in touch with somebody like Todd early on, they could have been ahead of the curve and the outcome probably could have been better. And so if you're in one of these plans, don't wait for the last minute. Get in touch with Todd or, somebody like Todd and get the proper representation and information so you can move forward with your M&A transaction with peace of mind. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com or feel free to reach out to me at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.